more like children than ever.
Right. Because we know what we're trying to do. We're trying to grow up.
What led to the demise of Haight Ashbury's hippie society of peace and love in the 1960s? Imagine living in a free-spirited place where you walk outside and hear a loud, boisterous laugh. You look over to see Jerry Garcia sitting on the steps of his Victorian house with a group of musicians and friends talking and laughing. After you stop by for a brief conversation, you head down the street when you come across your neighbor, Janis Joplin, who is on her way over to Garcia's place. After a brief chat, you turn the corner and head over to see friends jamming in the basement at their hangout on Page Street. Once inside, you sit down and have a spirited conversation with Grace Slick and Paul Kanter. After several hours that feel like minutes, you're feeling upbeat, and you bid them farewell and head down the street to your favorite coffee shop, the Blue Unicorn, where you come across a group of hippies outside singing and playing guitar. It's another laid-back day, 1967, in Haight Ashbury, as you wonder to yourself what the summer has in store for you and your neighborhood. Before long, things change when the media catches wind of this free-spirited mecca for artists and musicians and begin to manufacture a narrative about the locals they call flower children. Soon, just as quickly as it is blooming, Haight Ashbury begins to show signs of decay. The laid-back feeling dissolves into disillusionment and fear. So what happened to Haight Ashbury's famed 1960s community of peace and love? To figure that out, let's take a journey through how a group of musicians and artists grew into an experimental hippie society, what changed and how it transformed from a community of peace and love to a state of chaos and ruin. That's the freedom lie. There's been a lie about what freedom is, and the big lie is that freedom means absolutely and utterly free, and it really doesn't mean anything of the sort. Somebody comes in and they're free to move in, but likewise you're free to tell them to get out. Freedom is a premise that's been put forth that's been abused. For any scene to work, along with that freedom there's implicit responsibility. You have to be doing something somewhere along the line. There is no free ride. Jerry Garcia. In 1965, Haight Ashbury, America's epicenter of counterculture, was morphing from beatniks into hippies. The counterculture's taste in music is also morphing from folk music to folk rock and then to psychedelic rock.
There wasn't really, there were a lot of people there that were like us. They were people whose whole lives they'd been a little bit different, from everybody else. They were the people that were looking for something different. They would have become beatniks. You know what I mean? They were all people who were like influenced by the beatniks in a sense, and they were artists and they were poets and writers and all kinds of people. But they were all people whose life experience had been that they were a little out of whack with everything else. During high school or their whole lives, and they sort of came together, and it was just an ideal place for it because the rent was real cheap. The houses were wonderful. They're beautiful old Victorians, and you get 4 or 5 people, and you can rent a huge, wonderful Victorian house, fix it up any way you want, and it was great. It was a great way to live. And that was the neat part about it. That was the first thing. Now, of course, that disappeared immediately. I mean, as soon as it started getting to be publicized, then it all, of course, it evaporated immediately, and it no longer was important. It no longer had any power. Really. It did for the first couple of minutes, and then it went whoosh, and it was gone. And, it wasn't relevant anymore. That was it. It was really a moment. There was like a breath there for a moment. That was like an open door. It's like, ooh, look, then bam, it slammed shut again immediately.
In 1965, the Jefferson Airplane's original lineup was playing nightly at their house club, The Matrix. The band formed after founder Marty Balin had been on the Bay Area folk circuit playing and meeting other folk musicians such as Jerry Garcia and David Crosby when he met Paul Kanter at a hootenanny. He decided to form a band that incorporated a pop sound inspired by the Beatles after the British invasion turned music on its head. Promoter Chet Helms began to organize and host jam sessions for local bands in the basement of his boarding house on Page Street. Musicians began showing up for the jam sessions at the Old Victorian, and from that a communal existence began to develop, as did what some call the San Francisco Sound. From those jam sessions on Page Street, Helms helped form a band that eventually evolved into Big Brother and the Holding Company. Helms soon became the band's manager. In February 1966, Helms founded Family Dog Productions and began to promote concerts at the Fillmore Auditorium on Geary Boulevard. Helms and Bill Graham produced concerts on alternate weekends. But conflicts between Helms and Graham soon arose, and Helms began producing concerts at the Avalon Ballroom on Sutter Street. Soon Helms's Big Brother and the Holding Company became the house band at the Avalon. Musicians began to move to Haight Ashbury and live within blocks of one another, playing in the jam sessions on Page Street and venues around San Francisco. They helped each other survive by allowing each other to crash in their rented rooms, sharing rent, food, and the basics to survive. It became a communal existence based on necessity. A community action group called the Diggers opened a free store on Page Street which offered discarded but usable items, free for the taking or giving. The first free store was in a 6-car garage. Soon they opened numerous free stores around Haight Ashbury. The Diggers provided free food service in the panhandle of Golden Gate Park every day at 4 o'clock, feeding about 100 people with a stew from donated meat and vegetables. Eventually, they also opened a free medical clinic, initially by inviting volunteers from the University of California, San Francisco Medical School. These services helped perpetuate the experiment of a communal existence in the Haight. It was just a very small neighborhood affair when we were all working for each other's benefit. Most of the people of the Haight Ashbury scene were people who had been at San Francisco State and were living out there experimenting with all the new things that they'd discovered. It was a very high, healthy kind of thing. Jerry Garcia. The character of Haight Ashbury and its businesses had begun to shift in 1966 when a local shop opened a metaphysical book and trinket emporium at 1535 Haight Street on January 3, 1966. Inspired by the philosophies and writings of LSD pioneer Timothy Leary, it was called the Psychedelic Shop. They introduced Indian paisley fabrics, dance posters, colorful items that you could not find anywhere else. The world's first psychedelic newspaper, The Oracle, began publishing and being distributed out of the psychedelic shop. Soon, other psychedelic-themed shops and coffee houses began to open. They were selling everything from beads and boots to ponchos. The old Woolworths at 1542 Haight Street became the Print Mint, selling psychedelic posters, art prints, political broadsides, and the incredibly popular rock concert compositions made for the Fillmore and Winterland halls. A commercial renaissance began. In 1966, after several short residencies throughout the Bay Area, Jerry Garcia, Bill Weir, and Pigpen, along with a few other people, moved into a boarding house on 710 Ashbury, an old Victorian home where groups of musicians and friends begin to hang out. Our place got to be a center of energy, and people were in there organizing stuff. The Diggers would hang out there. The people that were trying to start various spiritual movements would be in and out. Our friends trying to get various benefits on for various trips would be in and out. We had the Psychedelic Shop, the very first one, and that was news. And other people were starting to open stores and starting to get underway. It was just about that same time that people started to come to town to find out about the hippie scene. Jerry Garcia.
See that girl barefoot in the floor, whistling and singing, she's a carry-on.
Janis Joplin's first Haight apartment was at 122 Lyon Street, where she lived with her boyfriend, musician Country Joe McDonald. In 1966, Big Brother and the holding company held auditions for a singer. "We mass auditioned 50, 60, 80 vocalists," Helms recalled. Then Helms persuaded Joplin, who he had first met back in Texas, where they were both from, to audition. Helms is convinced that she could knock people in San Francisco on their ass. Janis Joplin debuted with Big Brother at the Avalon on June 10, 1966. Big Brother guitarist Sam Andrew recalled his first impression of Joplin. "She came in, and she was dressed like a little Texan. She didn't look like a hippie. She looked like my mother, who is also from Texas. She sang real well, but it wasn't like, 'Oh, we're bowled over.' I mean, she was good, but she had to learn how to do that. It took her about a year to really learn how to sing with an electric band." In October 1966, Grace Slick makes her debut appearance with her new band Jefferson Airplane. This change in lineup will prove to be a pivotal moment for the band. They record their album Surrealistic Pillow in November 1966 with Grace Slick on lead vocals. Spencer Dryden, drummer for the famed Jefferson Airplane Band. The Haight was heaven for anybody with long hair. About 800 dyed-in-the-wool hippies, and that's it. It was a family thing, no tourists. Everybody did live together and did help each other out. 1966, many believe, was the true spirit of Haight Ashbury's peace, love, and happiness society. It was a small community of musicians, artists, and like-minded people enjoying their life, experimenting with a new way of living. They all describe it as a brief moment of bliss. Hippies would wander from house to house on warm evenings, rehearsing together, listening to records and smoking pot. They would form bands, disband, and form others. The music would filter from behind drawn shades of weathered Victorian homes to fill the neighborhood with sound. Jefferson Airplane's Paul Kanter describes 1966 in Haight Ashbury. "San Francisco was very good, I think, particularly the musicians, at transmitting the goodness of the day, rather than complaining about the badness of the day. The summer before the summer of love I always mention. Everything was possible, and plausible even. As word-of-mouth advertising spread the news, gradually more young people came. The underground press began writing about it. Then, all of a sudden, it caught everyone's imagination. Press and television began to glorify and publicize Haight Ashbury, and the youth took note. Hundreds of young people began arriving in Haight Ashbury each week to check out what was described as the headquarters for the new youth. And just as soon as the communal society began to blossom, the flower power narrative began to emerge. In December 1966, Jefferson Airplane was featured in a Newsweek article about the booming San Francisco music scene. The Human Be-In was announced on the cover of the San Francisco Oracle as a gathering of the tribes for a human be-in. The occasion was a new California law banning the use of the psychedelic LSD that had come into effect on October 6, 1966. A list of known gurus were invited to speak at the event held in Golden Gate Park in January 1967, including Timothy Leary in his first San Francisco appearance, who set the tone that afternoon with his famous phrase, "Turn on, tune in, drop out," as well as Ram Dass, Alan Watts, Allen Ginsberg, and many more. Music was provided by a host of Haight Ashbury bands, including Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead, Big Brother and the Holding Company, Quicksilver Messenger Service, and Blue Cheer. Massive amounts of White Lightning, specially produced for the event, was distributed for free by the Diggers. The national media were stunned, creating publicity about this event, leading to the mass movement of young people from all over America to descend on Haight Ashbury. In February 1967, Jefferson Airplane releases their album Surrealistic Pillow, which includes two of their psychedelic hits, Somebody to Love and White Rabbit, defining the moment. Their singles from the album charted up to number 3, and soon they were making appearances on mainstream television shows such as The Smothers Brothers and American Bandstand.
What's going to happen this summer in San Francisco?
Well, I couldn't even begin to tell you in an hour or so, but there are going to be a lot of people there. And
How many would you guess are going to congregate?
somebody said 100,000, but I don't know whether this is correct or not.
The establishment's going to get a little stirred up over that.
Their neighborhood soon filled with sightseers and pseudo-hippies. Their music, their vocabulary, and their hippie garb became stylish, and merchants began raking it in on psychedelic colors, fabrics, buttons, and cheap hippie trinkets.
Everywhere we went, people were smiling and, sitting on lawns drinking tea, festivals of music and stuff. I went to Haight Ashbury expecting it to be this brilliant place, and it was just full of horrible, spotty, dropout kids on drugs. It certainly showed me what was really happening in the drug cult. It wasn't what I thought of all these groovy people having spiritual awakenings and being autistic. It was like the Bowery. It was like alcoholism. It was like any addiction.
By summer of 1967, runaways and social misfits began sharing crash pads. Streets became filled with people day and night. The hippies didn't know they were flower children until they read about it. Then they got the flowers. It was the news media that made Haight Ashbury what it has been in the past, said Inspector Joseph Rincon of the San Francisco Narcotics Bureau. The influx of young people quickly began to take its toll on the community. There was not enough housing and food to supply everyone. Chronic hunger was becoming a common thing. Petty crime began to rise. People had nowhere to stay. As many as 15 or 20 would live in one cold water flat. They ate dirty food on dirty plates and slept on dirty mattresses. The rooms were full of lice, and people were becoming sick with hepatitis on the rise. Some of the places they lived in, commented Police Captain Mortimer McInerney, you'd vomit when you walked into them. Young people and runaways continuing to increase in numbers found the new scene to be anything but what they had heard about.
Today we went down to the city clinic, and we talked to the people down there about the vernal disease that is spreading through Haight Ashbury. And they told us that anyone who wants to come down, that they shouldn't be afraid to come down for a checkup, or if they think that they have this disease, to go down there right away and get it fixed.
So in other words, if you have it or not, and you want to check, to go down and do your thing.
There are a number of people in Haight Ashbury who have this. They have the syphilis, gonorrhea, and the clap. And it has to be stopped. Because if it isn't stopped now, it's just going to spread. And if it spreads, everyone here is going to catch it.
Of law enforcement. If the lawyers, doctors, advertising men, teachers, and political office holders who use marijuana are arrested today, the law might well be off the books before Thanksgiving. But the police, in making arrests, prefer to concentrate on individuals who have been manufactured by the mass media into a group that typifies the now popular image of the drug-oriented hippie. But the hippie, as created by the media, is a lie as well. Afraid of people who are exploring new ways of living freely, the largest society has classified and categorized them into a myth of the hippie, the long-haired dropout who performs his exotic rites for the convenience of visiting cameramen.
Coming to Haight Ashbury often meant going hungry, and it meant panhandling. They were popping pills and being used in the name of free love. It brought bad trips and bad times for many without resources. The locals become increasingly disillusioned and frustrated. This mecca for runaway kids throughout America was becoming a seething cauldron of vice and crime. The FBI reports the arrest of over 90,000 juvenile runaways. Most of those who flee well-off middle-class homes get picked up by the thousands. Police Chief Thomas Cahill explicitly warned in 1967 that Law and order will prevail. There will be no sleeping in the park. There are no sanitation facilities, and if we let them camp there, we would have a tremendous health problem. Hippies are no asset to the community. These people do not have the courage to face the reality of life. They are trying to escape. Nobody should let their young children take part in this hippie thing. Soon the rough element came in. Reports of violent assaults and robberies were reported. In October of 1967 occurred the death of the hippie march down Haight Street. This funeral marked the end of the dream for many of its originators. Disillusioned, they fled the scene. On March 3, 1968, music fans and curious onlookers flooded Haight Street in San Francisco to experience the Grateful Dead, who had set up flatbed trucks on the Haight Ashbury Avenue for one of their now famous free concerts in their earliest years as a band. The Dead set up their equipment on 2 flatbed trucks, plugged their gear into the electrical supply coming out of the nearby Straight Theater, and delivered a legendary show to thousands of fans in attendance. The Dead's spontaneous free show demonstrated that something special could still happen in the Haight at the same time the concert served as a swan song for the 60s in the Bay Area. It also became known as the Dead's farewell to the Haight, as the band had fully moved out of the neighborhood in 1968. So what went wrong in Haight Ashbury, and what have we learned from the hippie experiment? The anti-establishment idealistic experiment sounded great in theory, and there are some valuable takeaways. Being faced with conformist expectations, one can understand their position. But once put in practice, the dark realities of human nature became apparent, wanting all the security of the establishment without paying any of the dues. Just as Jerry Garcia pointed out, there is no free ride. But is there a middle ground? What do you think would have happened to Haight Ashbury if the media would not have gotten involved? How far do you think they could have taken their experimental community?
Right. Well, we've learned something from them, and now we're kind of playing around with that knowledge. And
what have you learned? Well, it's you can point out the example that the people that live in the community and play around with dope and stuff like that, they don't have wars, and they don't have a lot of problems that the larger society has.
You're going to San Francisco.
We need more understanding of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied, because we are the origin of all coming evil.